Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a question that's, well, pretty huge. What if we've lived before? We're not just talking philosophy here. We're going to look at some of the actual documented evidence that's fascinated and, let's be honest, totally baffled scientists and societies for a long, long time.
All right, so where are we going with this? First, we'll tackle the big question. Why can't we remember these supposed past lives? Then, we'll get into the, kind of scientific tool that researchers started using to try and unlock them. From there, we'll dive into the most famous case in history. You might have heard of it. And finally, we'll look at the strange patterns that started showing up when people put all this research together.
Okay, let's get right to it. We have to start with the biggest question, right? The one everyone asks. If we've all lived before, how come none of us remember it? Why is there this total blank?
You know, it's a huge mystery. But according to some very old philosophies, like Buddhism, this amnesia is totally on purpose. The idea is that our current minds, all our thoughts, our worries, just the daily chatter, it's like a constant static that just drowns out the signal from a much deeper part of who we are. And in Buddhism, they have a name for the ability to know your past lives, Seongcheol. Reaching that state is all about clearing that mental static. So get this, the memories aren't gone, they're not erased, they're just buried, waiting in a kind of mental quiet that most of us just never get to.
And here's where it gets really, really interesting. This ancient spiritual idea, it lines up almost perfectly with modern psychology's model of the mind. You've got the conscious, the subconscious, and then the deep, deep unconscious. Both paths, ancient and modern, seem to point to the same place. The answers are locked away in that deepest layer.
So, okay, if these memories are really locked down in our unconscious mind, is there a key? Is there some way to get in there without, spending 30 years meditating on a mountaintop? Well, one very serious scientist believed he'd found one.
And that scientist was Dr. Alexander Cannon. Now, let's be clear, this guy was not some fringe theorist. He was a pillar of the scientific community. We're talking multiple doctorates in medicine, philosophy, psychology, the whole shebang. So when a mind like his turned to the idea of past lives, people had to sit up and listen.
And this was his groundbreaking method. It's called age regression. He put someone under deep hypnosis, which is a state that gets you closer to the unconscious, and then he'd literally walk their memory backwards. Go back to when you were 10, then go back to when you were 1. And people would start acting like infants, crying and babbling. And then he'd take this incredible leap of faith and give the command, go to the time before this life.
And the wild part? It worked. It really seemed to work. Not just once or twice, but over and over and over again. Dr. Cannon documented 1,382 separate cases where people under hypnosis started describing in detail lives that were not their own. This wasn't just a collection of weird stories anymore. This was a massive body of data that science couldn't just ignore.
Dr. Cannon's serious academic work really set the stage for what would become the single most famous and, you could say, explosive past life case in history. This is the one that dragged the idea of reincarnation out of dusty books and dropped it right onto the dinner table in every home in America. On the one hand, you have Virginia Tighe, a totally normal 1950s American housewife from Colorado. On the other hand, you have Bridey Murphy, a 19th century Irish woman. Under hypnosis by a researcher named Maury Bernstein, Virginia became Bridey. It was like a different person just took over. And the personality that came through was just complete. She spoke with a thick Irish accent that Virginia definitely did not have. She used old-timey Irish slang from the 1800s, and she remembered these incredibly specific details about her life. Her husband, Sean, who she said was a barrister, which is basically a type of lawyer in Ireland, and the green countryside of her home in Cork.
Okay, and this is where the story goes from being just a weird, fascinating tale to something else entirely. Investigators, we're talking serious journalists, were sent all the way to Ireland to fact-check her story. And what they found was just stunning. So many of Bridey's little, obscure memories, the names of local shopkeepers, the existence of her husband's profession in that town, they all checked out. They were historically accurate.
Well, you can imagine what happened next. The whole thing just exploded. The book about the case, The Search for Bridey Murphy, became a massive bestseller, and it created this huge cultural firestorm, especially for Western religions that completely reject the idea of reincarnation.
All of a sudden, you had this documented, seemingly verifiable case on every coffee table in the country that flew directly in the face of their most basic beliefs.
Now, as shocking as the whole Bridey Murphy story was, it turns out it wasn't a one-off. Inspired by all the attention, researchers all over the world started using these same hypnotic regression techniques, and they found that this phenomenon was way more common than anyone thought. And even weirder, they started noticing these strangely consistent patterns. Take this for example. Statisticians started crunching the numbers from hundreds of these cases, and they found this really odd consistency. Someone is 10 times more likely to remember a past life where they were the same gender as they are now. Now, why would that be? It's a really peculiar detail, but it's a pattern that just kept popping up in the data.
And the stories just kept coming, each one seemingly more bizarre than the last. You had an American girl who, with no exposure to the language whatsoever, suddenly started speaking ancient Egyptian. Another person under hypnosis recalled being a man in India 500 years ago and started speaking fluent Sanskrit, which is pretty much a dead language. And then you have the cases that don't need any hypnosis at all.
This is a quote from a little boy in Turkey. From the moment he could talk, he insisted his name wasn't Ismail. He claimed he was a 50-year-old man who owned an orchard and had been murdered by one of his workers. He would constantly beg to be taken to his real family, and his parents said he would save the best bits of food at dinner for the children he insisted he remembered from his previous life.
And really, this is what it all boils down to, right? You have this growing mountain of evidence. Hundreds of documented cases, many with details that have been independently verified. And it all stands in direct opposition to some of our most deeply held cultural and religious beliefs. So, what do you do? What happens when verifiable facts seem to challenge unshakable faith?
And that really just leaves us with one final thought. This isn't just some abstract philosophical debate. All this evidence suggests this could be a fundamental truth about who we are. So the real question isn't just, could this be real? It's, what would it mean for you? If you could peel back the curtain and see your past life, what would you hope to find there?